Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another conversation stream. And this time around, my guest is one of my oldest and dearest YouTube friends, a guy I've known for almost as long as I've been on YouTube, the one and only SiriusMined. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. Good. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm really good. I'm really good.
Nice.
I'm really glad that you're here. And before we get too far into whatever we're going to talk about, which I'm not really sure yet, before we get too far into it, I want you. I always ask my guests to choose charities to sort of direct the viewers to donate to during these conversation streams, and you've actually chosen two. But the first one you said was Oxfam, which is this awesome, I guess probably sort of the premier global
Yeah. Yeah.
like poverty charity. So
Right.
what
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So for anyone who isn't familiar with Oxfam, basically what they do is you can sponsor an adoption of a farm animal. Could be goats, cows, pigs, oxen, whatever. In the developing world, in most cases, they're not actually going to slaughter the animal because they're too precious. But what they're going to do is they usually use them on the farm. The larger animals will work, and the smaller ones usually for milk, and they'll
Mhm.
grow flocks. And what they do is they send over an animal that's been impregnated. So when it gets there, that one animal is going to turn into several. And the idea is that in the developing world, they don't even have any infrastructure, and they need to be able to really depend. They want to become some more self-dependent. So they want to be not have to rely on things from outside the country. They want to be able to do things locally. So in the case of like goats or sheep, they might also shear them, make textiles.
Right.
Because they don't have the luxury of they can't afford to buy the stuff that we do. So they need to be able to make this stuff home, and so it's really to kind of build up local industry, mostly ag industry, so people can be self-sufficient and not be dependent on money from abroad.
Right. Giving money to people that need money. Who would have who thinks of this? Like this is
Yeah,
just
I know,
it's
right?
crazy enough to work, right?
Oh yeah, and it's great. What I love about it is that it's not just here's food, which is good. Obviously, if we can feed people that need food, that's great. But if we can give them things so that they can sustain themselves into the future, and of course it also creates jobs, because
Yeah.
then they have a farm, and now you got to tend all the flock of whatever, and so it helps the whole community, and that's where it's really built around the whole, not just one person or one family. It's built around building up communities so that those communities can support one another. And it's a long-term project, but they've been very successful at doing that, and
Yeah.
it's really one of my favorites. There's another one. There's others that are similar, but Oxfam is one of my favorites.
Yeah, and you also asked me to link Kiva,
Right.
which is sort kind of similar to what Oxfam does, but it facilitates people giving micro loans to people,
Exactly.
and yeah, so
Yeah. Basically, what it is, in a way, it's like crowdfunded loaning.
yeah,
So each individual will be donating in snippets of $25, and you can donate more than 25. But um, basically, it's usually people that are either have a business or they have a farm, and they're trying to build their own infrastructure, and they need money. And the problem is, of course, banks generally aren't going to loan to poor people. So having these micro loans, it gives them the ability to get credit, short term and medium term credit, so that they can build themselves up. And so I tend to focus. They cover a lot of different things,
right.
but I tend to give to the things that are build up the industrial base, build up the agriculture base, again, to help the people in those areas become more self-sufficient. So I give to a lot of farmers so that
Hmm.
they're either buying more livestock, or they're buying equipment so that they can, cover a bigger area, plant more food. Um, and which of course not only makes more food available, it also keeps the local price down, so that there's there's supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
And I've had a very good rate as far as the default rate has been very low. And so what I do is I never ever take the money back that gets paid back on the loan. I just plow it back
Put it
in,
back in. Yeah.
and right, and then help some more people. So which is great, because you can put in, just say, obviously people have limited budgets, but just say you put in $100, you can keep loaning out that $100 over and over and over again. and which is fantastic. So you can just continue to help people. Periodically I'll add more money into it, but it's great because, like I said, you can just keep helping. Whereas, normally most donations, you give the donation, it's gone.
Right.
This is something that you can kind of turn over again and again.
Yeah. I don't know. That sounds a lot like redistribution of wealth.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
That's exactly what it is. So Oxfam is on the screen right now, oxfamamerica.org, if anybody wants to donate to that, and also kiva.org. They're both linked in the description of the video. So if either or both of those is something that you would like to support, we would highly encourage you to do so. They're both awesome organizations that do very good and unfortunately very necessary work all over the world, including here. If you're that, if you're that kind of a person, I don't want to give to nobody in no other countries. I want to help people in America. Okay, great. They do stuff in America too. It's great.
They do.
But yeah, so anyway, we were talking really, really briefly before we actually started. And one of the things I said to you was that this is the first conversation stream that I've done. And I started doing these after the election back in November. So I haven't been doing them for like a real long time, but this is number 14. You're the first guest that I have not had. We did not have any pre-show discussion about what are we going to talk about. Because I just kind of had a feeling that we'll be able to fill an hour.
Yeah, at least. Well, and that's one thing, and just to that regard, like one thing, it's kind of a follow-on from the charity thing.
Yeah.
I thought about with Oxfam, there may be some people who, who are animal rights people who may have a little pause about, the whole thing of giving livestock that are going to be,
sure,
milked and all that. And I understand that. I would say, remember that here in the West, in a developed country, we have the privilege of, we don't need animals to run a farm.
Right.
So we can skip using animals for those purposes because we have the ability. We're a rich country and we can use plows and all sorts of combines and all that. Mm-hmm. In the developing world, they really don't have that in a lot of places. And even places where, like I said, in most cases, these animals will not be eaten. They'll be there for sustenance and for working and like I said, in the case of goats and cows and sheep and cows, goats and sheep, they'll be there for the textiles. So and that's one thing I think a lot of times we forget, that even poor people in our country are better off than poor people in most of the world. And that's kind of sad because poor people here are pretty screwed.
Yeah.
So
yeah. You're right. I mean, there are like, obviously there are people living in terrible poverty in this country, but I mean, yeah, when you look at like poverty in, like India, I mean, it's almost unfathomable compared to what, not that there aren't people, I don't want to get into like, oppression Olympics or whatever, but right. I mean, there are in other parts of the world, there are people who make do with so little.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible, to even to wrap your head around it. Like how can people survive with so little, but that's the situation.
Well, that's the thing. And like you said, we do have some people like that here. It's a matter of degree, right? It's so widespread in certain places, particularly in Africa, and the thing that's really sad about Africa is that a lot of African countries are actually mineral rich or resource rich. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of cases, due to the effect of colonialism for hundreds of years, the people who run these countries tend to, concentrate wealth at the top, which, as we know, is bad for the economy.
Yeah.
And then they spend their money not on the locals, not in local industry and trying to promote the locals. They spend it in Europe, they spend it in America, they spend it in Saudi Arabia, and takes the money. So the wealth leaves the country and never comes back.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things you and I have in common, and I think one of the reasons why we get along so well, is that in terms of pretty much everything, but particularly in terms of politics, we agree on not on on our ideals, I think, and we also have, but we also have like an awareness of how you need to be practical in order to realize those ideals, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And because you're someone who I always sort of look to, like, you know, because I have a lot of friends, and I know you do too, and we both know people that are further further to the left than we are, at least in terms of like tactics that they
Right.
advocate, not necessarily in terms of like what the world should look like, or, you know, what our areas of focus should be, but just in terms of tactics and strategy and things like that. And you're someone that I always sort of look to and say, okay, you know, like Joe, he's the sensible one.
Thank you.
You know, like he'll be able to figure, like he's the one who's going to be like, okay, let's figure something out that's practical that we can actually accomplish. You know.
Well, that's the thing. And to your point, I saw a video by Bo of the Fifth Column a couple days
Yes.
ago, a few days ago. He's great channel.
Yeah.
And it's funny because he's actually even more to the left than most of the people that you and I are talking about that are friends of ours who drive us nuts sometimes with their impracticality.
Sure.
He's actually an anarchist, but he doesn't use and speak in those terms because he knows that would turn people off.
Right.
But he's also a pragmatic guy. So again, even you can be a radical and still be sensible.
Right.
And so my thing is that so one of the things he talked about is that just say within the Democratic Party, there's this kind of schism. We've sensed it. It's where you have like there's the moderate and conservative Democrats, and there's the mainline liberal Democrats, and then there's progressives, and then there's a lot of headbutting, particularly with the progressives.
Right.
And one of the things that I've been frustrated because I've encountered this in conversations myself, people who identify as progressive, when they look at just say somebody like me, who's kind of like a mainline liberal, maybe somewhere between that and moderate, and they'll say, "Oh, well, you only want the status quo." Like, well, no, I don't want to. I don't want. If my choices are going backward or the status quo, I'll take status quo every day because I don't want to lose ground. Like Patton said, don't fight twice for the same dirt.
Right.
But if I can get a lot of progress, if there's a way to work it out, absolutely, I'll take it. But if I see that that's not going to be possible, then I think I'll take incremental change over no change.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So I'll take big change over incremental change. I'll take incremental change over no change, and I'll take no change over retrograde. And the fact of the matter is, it's weird. If when you look at individual issues, you will find that as a populace, we agree more with progressive ideas than we think we do. But in practice, we don't vote that way.
Right.
And so we're stuck with that. And so we have to work around a system where those progressive ideas can be marginalized, can be misrepresented. And in some cases by even the people that are trying to do it. I mean, do you know Jack? He spells it as Geahk. He's got a YouTube channel as well.
I think I know who you mean.
Yeah. So he's a good guy. He's someone up till recently, he's not really believed in electoral politics. He's an activist. But the thing is, and this is something Point Bo made, is that, well, we kind of need both. You need the idyllic people who have that drive, that vision. I want to get the world here, and they're never going to be totally satisfied. And they're going to keep pushing to that hopefully good end goal. But you need, if you have no friends in government, then a lot of these things can't be accomplished. Like we're never going to have a single payer healthcare system if we don't have control of the electoral system.
Right. Yeah.
That's just a fact. There's no amount of marching and lobbying and setting up NGOs that's going to fix that problem by itself.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you're going to have to figure out how to wield the government, at some point to solve some of these problems. Like, well, and but part of it, like, it's something that I struggle with a lot and have for years and years and years, that finding that balance between the idealism and the pragmatism, because it's different from day to day. It's different for particular issues, for particular problems. Um, like there's, and I'll give you an example of like how I've had to sort of make the adjustment recently, just in my own mind. There's a Twitter account that I ran across a couple weeks ago, and I forget exactly what the handle is or what the name is, but it's basically it's a list of all the things that President Biden hasn't done yet. Right. And my first reaction upon seeing it was kind of what you just did. And I was like, he's been president for like a week.
Yeah,
But then I thought, but there's nothing wrong with reminding people, and there's
sure.
nothing wrong with sort of putting it out there and saying, and it's stuff that Biden has said that he wanted to do. Like, it's not like, he hasn't started the mission to Mars yet. Like, it's stuff that he has said he wanted
Right.
to do that he hasn't actually moved on yet. And my first reaction was, Jesus, give him a minute. Like, it's not like he's not doing anything. Like, he's doing a lot of stuff. He just, but then I sort of stopped myself, and I asked myself the question, and I was like, I mean, am I just sort of having an instinctive reaction to this because I'm losing patience with like people on the left who are just never satisfied with anything,
Mm,
or is this actually a good thing? To just to keep it out there, just to
mm.
keep the pressure on and say, hey, he hasn't done anything about. I think one of the ones at the time was, he hasn't done anything about immigration yet, right? And since then he has signed some executive orders and he has started moving some things
Right.
about changing immigration policy. But at the time that tweet was made, it was he hadn't really done anything yet, and I thought, I mean, yeah, it kind of my instinctive reaction is, God, just give him some time to do something. But then I thought, maybe this is a good thing to sort of just to keep it out there. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think yes and no. I guess to me, I agree that you constantly need to remind people, and this is what I always tell people: like, get the guy in, get the best person you can get in, get them in,
Right.
because again, you can't do anything if you don't control the system. You don't have enough people in the system. But then, yeah, absolutely. But I think even there, how you do it, you can do that in a positive way, or you can do it in a negative way. Because if you say he hasn't done anything about that, that's negative. You could say here are priorities that still need
Right.
attention. Still makes the point. These still need to get done. We got a checklist, boy. You need to check these things off. We're
Right.
watching you, but we are giving you the time. But don't forget, we're looking over your shoulder and we're waiting for these things. So I think that's the difference. Because to me, when someone says to me like I'm just sitting there and still trying to figure out where the bathroom is, and they're like, you haven't done this thing yet, like. Whoa!
Like, I just got here.
I just got here. It puts the person on the defensive, and I think that's not helpful. It's more helpful to say, again, from the positive, like we're behind you, but you need to do these things too. Don't forget these things.
Yeah.
And then check off the list. And sometimes you need to maybe add some things to the list, or hey, you
Yeah.
did something, but you didn't quite. You're still not. We're not going to check this off. We're going to give you a half check. It's not quite there yet. You know. So always acknowledge progress in the right direction. But again, you don't give people too many cookies for doing the right thing either. If a friend of mine posted on Facebook about the vote to convict Trump, and he was feeling warmth toward some of the Republican senators that had voted the correct, or from our perspective,
Yeah.
the correct way, and he kind of stopped himself. And I said, well, I get where you're coming from, because for me, it's like almost a sense of relief. I mean, I wanted Trump to be convicted, but the fact that any Republicans came along, the fact that 7 did compared to
Mhm.
none a year ago, I feel relieved, but I don't feel grateful, because you should vote to convict a president who tries to usurp the government and stage a coup. So
Right. Like,
that's the right
yeah,
thing to do.
that's pretty cut and dry, you would think. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, you're not going to get a medal for doing the decent thing. You're doing the correct thing.
Yeah. What
Yeah,
did you what are your thoughts on the second impeachment of Donald Trump? Because I know, and again, this is something that I'm kind of torn about, that I'm kind of two minds about, because there was the deal to not call witnesses that eventually the Democrats agreed to, but there was some arguing about that.
Right, right.
And eventually they reached an agreement where they said, okay, we'll have this particular account read into the record, but we won't actually call witnesses. I feel like a lot of the optics on that were really bad, because you heard, reports of like senators saying, "Oh, this is going to take so long, and people want to go home. People want to go home to their families, and this is just going to take forever." And that sounds like, well, gee, we would try to hold, we would do everything we could to hold Trump accountable, but it's just going to take so long.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then the other side of that is, we're probably not going to get the votes anyway. So dragging this out for 3 or 4 more weeks is just going to be a waste of time, So I can kind of see both sides of that. But like, where do you sort of come down on that?
Well, I guess, I mean, the way I look at it, yes, the optics are when you basically say like, well, we don't have time to do our job. That always, and especially as an employer, and look, we're all an employer, right? We're all an employer of these people that are representing us in Congress, right?
Right.
And in the White House. So, so as an employer of, in industry, I didn't have time. I've had people say I give somebody a task and I wanted a certain outcome, and so they wanted to do it like the quick and easy way, and I said no because I need all these extra things, and they're like, oh, well, that will take more time. I'm like, do you get paid? Then I need you to do that. I understand this. Now I understand that it's going to take more time, and I'm not going to judge you on that. I'm not going to hold it against you because you're doing it because I told you to. But don't tell me that we don't have enough time to do the thing when I'm the one who decides how much time we have to do the thing.
Right.
And so same thing as the people. I'm like, I don't, the only argument to me that's valid is that, okay, because there is that checklist that the people have out there that, the people are saying, hey, you haven't done this yet. Mm-hmm. Okay, we know, because we know it's not going to change the outcome. You could take the pragmatic step. It's okay. We don't want to delay getting onto that agenda because that agenda is really important and it's not going to change the result. But to me, it's a missed opportunity because I think I'm not saying that they would have gotten enough to actually convict him, but maybe we get 8, maybe we get 9, because the more this stuff gets out there, we would have gotten 5 if they had the vote a week earlier. We would have got 5. We got 2 more because as the evidence gets laid out, and so I really felt like if they really could have spent more time doing this and called the witnesses and really relayed and called some of the people like the Horns guy was willing to testify. I wanted him there. It would have been a bit of a shit show, but I wanted him there because I wanted him to say, no, we were doing it because he told us to. Because if you lay out the evidence so starkly, then it becomes almost impossible to vote to acquit. And then if you do, you can be that mean, if the people get it, then the average voter gets it, then we can hold those people accountable, in 2022 when they come up for election.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm pretty much on the same page with it as you are, and also with me, it's also I would have appreciated the symbolism of the Democrats voting to and of forcing the calling of witnesses and forcing this to be an actual trial, not just basically dueling presentations between groups of of managers, as they're called in the impeachment trial. It would have indicated to me that the Democrats are really, really serious about this. And, I've talked before, like I am a Democrat. I'm a registered Democrat. I vote Democrat. I'm not ashamed of that. But I do often wish that the elected officials in our party, particularly in Congress, but also honestly, also in my state legislature too, because the Democrats here in Maryland are not quite as gutsy as I kind of wish they were sometimes. And it would have been an indication to me that they were willing to do what was necessary as much as they were able to hold these people accountable and to not just turn the page and move on, but to actually have consequences and accountability and draw a line and say, this cannot happen. And when we have the power to punish people who do this and to establish this precedent that you cannot do this, we're going to do that. So I kind of wish they had done, just like, I was talking a couple weeks ago, a couple of days ago, sometime relatively recently, about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Right. And how she's been removed from her committee assignments, which is great. But there was also some chatter from Democratic leadership after January 6th about, if we find that any members of the House were involved in this, we're going to look at not just killing their committee assignments, but expelling them from the House,
Right.
which is like the nuclear option. It's like a really, really major thing that almost never happens when the House says, we are voting you out. You cannot be in this body anymore. And, I, I, I would, I would like to see that happen, not just because I think I agree. Like if people were involved in the insurrection, they should be expelled.
Yeah.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene is a nutcase, and she should be expelled just for being a conspiracy theorist and a nutcase. But also it indicates that, the Democrats, they get it.
Yeah.
They get it, and they get how serious it is. And they get that, sometimes you have to take what historically might be a drastic measure in order to clean things up and remove people from power who should not have been given power in the first place.
Right.
So yeah, that's part of it too. It's like, I really wish they would push a little harder, than they have been.
And you pointed on something a very important point that I've been thinking about lately, that I actually was hoping to to bring up, in either in this or in our usual streams. One of the, again, as I said before, I feel that like a lot of times progressives will say, well, the Democrats, they're just for the status quo. And I feel it's an unfair charge because people are looking at the result and not this process.
Right.
But what I do think is a valid criticism, and has led us to where we are today, is that the Democrats, you said it yourself, they're timid. They're not clamoring for the status quo. They're timid.
Yeah.
And this is basically, I've literally said this since the 90s, that this is like a battered spouse syndrome, where we put the Democrats in the position of the battered wife, and the Republicans are the beer guzzling abusive husband,
right.
And so they're constantly gaslighting the Democrats. They're constantly threatening to beat the Democrats up, and so the Democrats do timid things to try to not get beat up, and then they get beat up anyway because of course their abusers don't give a shit about their word, because they're abusers. That's why they're abusers, right? So and good example of this is I told people about what happened when we went to Gulf War II. Now 70% of the population of this country was in favor of going into Iraq.
Right.
So now the Democrats were stalling, and they were like trying to vote against it, and they were saying, oh, well, we got to look at it and all this kind of stuff. They were trying to be non-committal because they really didn't want to do it, but they were petrified that if they didn't go forward with it, that they would be accused of being weak, that the Republicans, they see you're weak, the Democrats are weak, they're not willing to stand up for this country, blah, blah, blah. I've heard this going back to the 80s.
Yeah.
Well, so of course, what did the Democrats do? They roll, which is weak.
Yeah.
So that's the irony of it. We don't want to be perceived as weak, so we'll be weak.
Exactly.
But so that's why they caved. And the same thing happens like when there's government shutdowns. Very often the Democrats cave because what ends up happening when there's a shutdown, the people that the Democrats want to help start getting hurt. Because it's always the people in the bottom that get hurt the worst. It's never the guys at the top. So they end up caving. And so just like most abusers, they know, well, even if she calls the cops, she's not going to press charges, and the cops are going to leave, and then I'm going to start beating on her again. Then the instant they leave. And that's what happens. And so I heard that part of the reason why they made this compromise is that Mitch McConnell said, well, if you call witnesses, then I'm going to go back to being an obstructionist again. And I'm thinking, wow, what an empty threat, because you're going to do that anyway, Mitch. You're a liar, and you're not going to cooperate. So I really feel that instead of the Democrats need to start calling the Republicans bluff, because here's the thing. Okay, just imagine if the Republicans start, blocking everything and not letting things go through. That's whenever the Democrats have stood their ground and said, no, we're not gonna put up with you. The Republicans are always the one to pay the price. But the Democrats don't think of it at the time. And they also, again, they start thinking of the harm that's happening while it happens. And sometimes it's kind of like going on strike. When you go on strike, a lot of workers, they're losing their livelihood for a while. It's hard, but everyone has to stand together, and you have to, suffer the slings and arrows in order to make the strike work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. And so I really wish that the Democrats were more willing to call the Republicans bluff and say, all right, fine, you want to do that? Let's see who pays the consequences. Because again, in my experience, whenever it has gone that far, it's almost always the Republicans that rightly get the blame, because people realize, hey, these guys are not playing nice. They're not willing to let the process go forward. You're not even willing to get a vote. It's the same thing like somebody had said about the filibuster. Okay, you don't kill the filibuster necessarily, but go back to the old way. Make someone stand there and pee in a with a catheter and into a
Right.
bag and make
Right.
them work for it. Don't just say I filibuster. Oh, what can we do now? No, make them work for it.
Yeah. I mean, it is a lot. It's really similar to a cycle of abuse, because it's sort of it moves in a circle where the Republicans take power and fuck everything up, which allows the Democrats sometimes to come back and win the next election and win the White House, or take back some seats in Congress. But then especially like the situation that they're in now, where they have a decent majority in the House, not a huge majority, but
Right.
a big enough majority. But in the Senate, they have a tiebreak majority. So, there's really very little that they can actually do as long as the filibuster is in place.
Right.
And so, there's the situation set up where in 2 years the Republicans can come back, and say, see, the Democrats, they said, put us in charge and we'll fix everything. And what have they fixed? They haven't fixed anything. They haven't accomplished anything. And, they said, hey, put us in power and we'll fix it. And they haven't fixed it, and, really, if the Democrats really want to be able, if we want the Democrats to really be able to do sweeping major changes, they need a larger majority. We just need to elect more of them to Congress. That's the
That's right.
first thing.
That's right.
I mean, we don't, there needs to be steps beyond that, but that's a very necessary first step. So that way they can all tell Joe Manchin to go to hell. And you don't have to worry about what Joe Manchin says, or Joe Manchin will be one Democrat among a majority where it doesn't matter if they lose one vote. Who cares?
Right.
Let him vote whoever he wants.
That's right. If we got 55 Democrats in the Senate, Joe Manchin's irrelevant.
Yeah. And guess what? If that happens, Joe Manchin is probably voting with the Democrats 99% of the time anyway.
Exactly.
Because he just likes the attention. I mean, come on.
Although one thing, and I said this the other night in Paul's stream, that one of the things that I think that a lot of people on our side of the fence miss, why it's so important to control those chambers, is that it's whoever controls the chamber controls the agenda. So that's the reason why, like the Democrats, the last term, 400 bills that went to Mitchie Boy's desk, none of them even got a hearing in the committees.
No.
So you can't blame the Democrats for nothing happened, because they literally couldn't even bring it up for a vote, and not even on the floor vote. They couldn't even get it in the committees. And that's another thing a lot of people on our side don't really understand, or are not aware of, the literal process of moving bills through these chambers and how bills become laws.
Right.
And that's unfortunate. So what they do is they look at the end result and say, and then they take that rhetoric that the Republicans say, see, the Democrats promised you they would do things and they didn't do anything. They go, yeah, that's right. And then they get cynical and then they don't vote. And then the Republicans get back in and break more shit.
Right, exactly. And blame it on the Democrats, or blame it on the government. That's my favorite. It's the tried and true Republican tactic that they have been doing for as long as I have been alive, and for a lot longer than that, where they say the government is the problem. They get elected and control the government. They fuck the government up. And then they say, see, told you, government can't do anything.
That's right. Well, sure. When Republicans run it, the government's a clusterfuck.
It's like you're breaking it on purpose. Of course, it's not going to work if you break it on purpose.
Well, I pointed out to people that were against Obamacare, and I said, like, when all the states that joined in with the exchanges, Obamacare did well. In fact, Chupuka, he works for me.
Yeah.
We actually got better coverage for less money under plans that were introduced because of Obamacare. But even a state where they sandbagged it and sabotaged it, sure, things were terrible. It's like, well, yeah, if you purposely try to break it, it gets broken. Imagine how that works.
Yeah.
But I had an argument, I said the whole thing about our side. Like, I had an argument with Kate, about this, and she was like, And she's fallen into that trap of like, well, the Democrats, and she even said, well, the Democrats come in and they kind of bring it back to where it was, and then the Republicans come back in and break it, and that's why she's she hates the electoral politics side, because the Democrats never seem to get better than fixing. I'm like, well, sure, if things keep getting broken and you have to fix them first before you can get to the next step. So now and I said this the other night too, I feel like the goal should be, now obviously Joe Manchin's a pain in the ass.
Right.
He votes with the Democrats about 65% of the time. Yeah. Now, of course, it's because he's in like bright red Indiana. I don't know that a progressive, a Bernie Sanders, AOC type person could ever get elected, at least under the current climate in Indiana. Maybe 30 years ago, but not today. So my thing is, don't try to primary out Joe Manchin, because all that's going to mean is a loss of a seat. Instead, look at, okay, what areas, what states are there, so quote unquote establishment Democrats running where someone like AOC could win. And I was looking over, got on the next election, North Carolina, Iowa, Ohio, Florida. Yeah. As long as the person comes off as, pro worker, pro union, and I would probably advise them not to use the socialist label, because those don't play very well in those states. Yeah. But those states are purple enough that if you talk to the issues of those people in those states, that an AOC type person, at least from as far as what ideals she wants to accomplish, could win. And you primary out those Democrats, because those Democrats are probably going to lose anyway. Right. So, but now you have a chance to potentially now get somebody who's more progressive and bring the party. So you don't worry about individual people. Worry about getting the whole party as a whole more to the left and more toward the way you want, but maintain the control of those chambers. That is critical. If we had the Senate when Trump was in, he doesn't get 3 justices. He doesn't get the last one. And he gets better people, maybe not stellar people, but we get better than Gorsuch and Kavanaugh.
Right. Right. Exactly. And just real quick, you said Manchin was from Indiana. Manchin is a senator from West Virginia.
Oh, West Virginia.
The point is the same, but I just, for the record. And I know, because I live right next door to West Virginia.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, and it's it's a good point. Actually, I was talking about this with someone the other day about how, because the point came up of, well, the Democrats could just, we need to elect a better Democrat from West Virginia. And my response was, I don't know if we can get a better Democrat from West Virginia right now than Manchin, because it's a super red state. And unlike other keys, Georgia used to be thought of as a red state too. But now we know better because of voter suppression and gerrymandering and stuff. Like, Georgia is one of those states that is made to appear redder than it is. It's not that it doesn't have deeply conservative areas, because it does, but it also has urban centers like Atlanta and Savannah, that skew much more progressive. And overall, it's at least a purple state, if not an outright blue state at this point. That's right. But West Virginia doesn't have those major urban centers.
Right. And one big difference between the two is that Georgia has a very large Black population who votes almost exclusively Democrat. Now, and what that's been the change in recent days was what made the difference in this election, and what almost made a difference in the last gubernatorial race, is that when the Black population was energized and felt that the rest of the group cared what they thought, they came out and voted. And I'm hoping, even though it's not going to change the overall landscape, I think that we can make, even in states like Alabama and Mississippi, the 2 most conservative states, there are districts that we should be winning if we could convince Black voters we actually give a damn about them and we're actually going to address their issues.
Right.
We can get them out and at least pick up some seats in some of the softer areas. And now what's going to take, I think, in a place like West Virginia is very white. Yeah, extremely white, and that's part of the issue, because we know white America tends to vote more conservative. But here's the thing. Now, as much as obviously you and I are atheists, we would prefer people who aren't checking the Bible for their political stance every 5 minutes. But I think in a state like West Virginia, you probably need a religious candidate, because that's who they're going to go for.
Yeah. And
you know,
so you find a progressive Christian, of which there are
right,
many, who
exactly,
unfortunately, my guest on the show last week, Pastor June, is such a person,
right,
is a progressive Christian, and we probably agree on pretty much everything except whether or not there's a God.
right,
Like we disagree on that, but everything else, she and I are more or less on the same page. And yeah, I mean, if you show me a devoutly religious progressive Democrat, who wants to raise the minimum wage and fight for health care for everybody, and fight for, fighting climate change and lifting people out of poverty, and more funding for education, and all the other things that we so desperately need, and they can win, god damn it, run them. I don't give a shit how
exactly,
religious, if you know what I mean, like if they're,
exactly.
yeah.
And I think that's another reason why, one of the reasons why Warnock did better than Ossoff, even though they
Mhm.
both won,
Yeah.
because he's black and he's a preacher, and that plays in Georgia. You
Yeah.
know,
Well, and not just a preacher, but the preacher of a truly historic church. I mean,
mm,
he's the preacher of what was formerly Martin Luther King's
good,
church.
excellent point, excellent
And
point.
also, and I think John Lewis attended there. So I mean, he
Yes,
wasn't just a preacher, he was a preacher of a significant
mm,
location.
right,
And I agree. I think that helped him a lot.
right. Again,
I
he
think,
got about, I think it was 70 or 80,000 more votes than Ossoff did,
yeah,
which is substantial. So I think that, and I think so. I think that's where we have to go. I think, even if you look at like in Kentucky, you obviously ran McGrath against Mitch. She did
mhm,
well. I mean, she didn't do well enough to win.
right,
But again, going with a ex-military person, I think an ex-military person who was religious might have done even better.
sure,
Um, and you're right. You said about progressive, like progressive Democrats. A friend of mine, my friend Todd, he's a deacon in this church, and like probably the one issue that we'll probably never agree on is abortion.
mhm,
But even there, I really love him. Right around the time, there's always a march that the Catholics do to Washington D.C. It's like an anti-abortion kind of thing. But when that happens, and he makes a point, and he makes no bones, like, hey, if you're my friend, you got to understand this is my position. However, around the same time, he also posts to his fellow Christians that if you're not for social justice, if you're not for economic justice, if you're not for prison reform, if you're not for all these things, then you are not pro-life.
right.
He said, yeah, he said, you got to care about them after they're born too, or else you're not pro-life.
Yeah, like that's part of your life goes on after you're born.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
well, usually, I mean, that's the idea.
We would hope.
That's the
Yeah.
hope. Yeah,
Right. And for that matter, he's for prenatal and neonatal care. Like
yeah,
again, you got to care about the whole package, and so so even there, so I would say like somebody like that, I could still abide because he's not looking to change the law. He just that's his own feeling that he's against it. I would vote for him because
mhm,
I know that he'd still support a progressive agenda.
yeah. Oh, yeah,
You know,
totally.
and
Yeah,
he wouldn't vote to take away anybody's rights. He would just have his own religious belief is that it was wrong, but he wouldn't try to stop you. I could live with that.
yeah, yeah. As long as you're not going to try to impose, like harmful policy on people. Your personal opinion, your personal opinion is your personal opinion. I mean,
Right.
as long as it's not something absolutely monstrous. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
like,
Like gay people aren't human or some bullshit like
yeah, but like I would never vote that way. Like, well, but you're still kind of saying it,
that. Yeah, yeah,
like I don't think so. I don't think so.
exactly. So what Todd says to his fellow Christians, he says, so let's create the circumstances where women are less likely to feel the need for an abortion.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And or when pursue all sorts of policies that have been shown to reduce the number of abortions that occur in a
Right.
year. I mean, there's all kinds of things that Republicans are also against. You know what I mean? Like that's, and this is, almost every time we talk about, almost anytime anybody on the progressive side of things talks about abortion, we always end up talking about the fact that, Republicans basically want to push pregnant people into a corner where they have no options whatsoever. You can't
Right.
have an abortion. You can't prevent pregnancy by having like easy access to contraceptives.
Right.
You can't have adequate financial support, you
Right.
know, for raising a child. If you're a low income person, you can't have, you know, prenatal care and other care. Like, you, no, we're gonna force you to have the baby, but we're
Yeah.
not gonna help you at all. And
Well,
that's our pro life stance.
well, and it's even in their rhetoric, because they always say that, that thing, choices have consequences. So they're basically trying to punish you. You had sex, whether even it might not have been your choice.
That's true.
we're,
Yeah.
but there has to be a consequence. I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be. It's like, if I get into a car, so it's kind of like saying, yeah, I'm not going to let you wear a seatbelt in your car in case you get an accident. So in case you get an accident, but if you have an accident and you get hurt, well, accidents have consequences. Well, yeah, but if you let me wear a seatbelt,
Yeah.
there would have been fewer consequences. But you're blaming me
Yeah.
that I didn't wear my seatbelt when you outlawed them.
Well, and there are also a lot of the same people who, when the finger is pointing at them, they default to, well, come on now, we can't start legislating morality.
Yeah,
It's like, okay, so if a person gets pregnant and wants to have an abortion, well, sorry, your choices have consequences. But if it's you who is facing some kind of potential consequence, oh, hey, come on now, we can't start legislating morality here.
oh
I mean,
yeah,
people can have the right to make choices after all.
exactly.
you know
Or especially if it's their daughter or wife.
exactly.
All these Republicans who get caught, bringing their wife or their mistress or daughter to out of state to go get an abortion. It's like, well, you rotten hypocrite. So you knew that we needed to have these services, and they're necessary medical services, and you still want to have access to them. You just want to prevent everybody else because
Yeah,
you want to moralize and think you're superior.
exactly.
I've come to the realization that people on the right, and this is both the Republican type and the libertarian type, they don't believe in really any of their ideals. They don't really.
They don't seem to. No,
No,
I think the
because
Trump years showed that pretty clearly.
yeah, because I came to the realization recently that if I was a libertarian and so I believe in the principle of non-aggression. And look, the principle of non-aggression is not a bad precept. Hey,
Mhm.
I'm not going to transgress against you as long as you don't transgress against me. I like that. Who could be against that, right?
Right.
But then they kind of ignore or deny all the instances when they're regulation.
Right.
But you would say, okay, well, the whole point of regulation, you're allowed to pollute this much, and you can make this much, and more than that. My right to swing my arm ends at your nose.
Right.
Say, hey, when you cross this line, you're hitting the rest of us in the nose.
Exactly.
You're freezing up there, Steve.
Yeah, you were freezing up a little bit too. I think it's my internet. So
with you.
Yeah. But I think it's my internet that, before the end of the show, go ahead and throw them into the chat and talk about those. But, Biden he's just sort of at the very, very beginning of his administration, but how do you think he's doing so far?
Obviously it's very early, so things could go. He's going to be executive. He only has, he actually doesn't have any control of that process. He has the bully pulpit, and that's what he's got. And so that'll be the path that, there are limits to what he personally can do. And then I said, again, in Paul's stream the other night, just pretend, for sake of argument, you replaced everybody in the Senate with a clone of Bernie. And then Bernie becomes president, and you replace everybody in the House with a clone of AOC. They're still not going to be able to deliver, at least as long as the filibuster exists as it does. They're not going to deliver everything that they want to. Not because they wouldn't try. I totally believe Bernie and AOC are completely sincere in everything they say they want to do. That given the opportunity, they would. But there's a limit, because we have the process, and the process is there. It's there on purpose, and it's designed to be difficult to change things. Not because the founders wanted, some status quo or whatever. What they wanted is they wanted to protect against the mob.
Right.
They wanted to. There's a reason why, if you look at the Bill of Rights are actually undemocratic. The Bill of Rights say we don't give a crap how many people want to do this. You can't write a bill that says that the police or the army can move into your house and watch you every minute of every day until you break a law. They can't take away your right to free assembly and free speech. Because if we were totally democratic, you could get enough people and you could just say, hey, atheists are not allowed to talk ever.
Right.
Leftists aren't allowed to talk ever. Well, the Bill of Rights says no, you can't do that. I don't care if it's everybody except one person. You can't do that.
Right.
Not without changing the Constitution, anyway.
Yeah, and which, as you said, is intentionally very difficult to do. Yeah. Just in case anybody missed it, because I said it earlier when we were having some technical difficulties, which I think have cleared up. But if anybody watching has questions that you want us to talk about, go ahead and drop them into the live chat, and for the last couple of minutes, we'll answer questions if anybody has any. Yeah, I mean, I think he's doing. It's ridiculously early, but I think he's doing good so far. I mean, there's always, just like that Twitter account that I mentioned a while ago, like there's always stuff there's always something that we need to, that he maybe could have done that he hasn't done yet, and we need to, like you said, so keep reminding Biden and anybody in charge, hey, there's a list, we're keeping track, we're watching for certain things, and if we get too far into this and we don't see any movement on these things, we're going to let you know about it.
Right.
I mean, I think that's really important, but I feel like he's, I mean, and also part of it is, I mean, God, look who he's replacing. I mean, he doesn't have a lot to live up to as far as his predecessor, but he is doing, I mean, so far so good. I mean, it's only 3 weeks, but so he's doing a decent job so far, I think.
Yeah. And so that was the other thing too, as when we get to the legislative stuff, because the margins are as narrow as they are.
Yeah.
It's going to require, again, even if we had a Senate full of Bernies and a House full of AOCs and Bernie and some amalgamated clone of him and AOC, AOC and Bernie have a political baby and it grows up to become president.
Yeah.
Because of the margins, because of the filibuster, their compromise is going to be unavoidable. I'll put it that way. I won't say necessary. I'll say unavoidable. So the idea is to not compromise on the big things, and for those things where compromise are necessary is, don't give away the home world. I'm sure you know where that reference comes from.
Yeah.
But find those places where we can make progress. So what can we do? And in some cases, are there things that the other side wants that we are not necessarily looking for, but don't hurt what we want to do?
Right.
So it's like, all right, they want something like, like I remember this was I think I forget, it was Bill Clinton was president at the time or early Obama, but basically it was like, well, we want to name this building after Reagan. Okay, gag me with a spoon, but to use an ancient reference, but fine. You know what? Fuck it. Here's the Reagan, the Ronald Reagan everything building. I don't give a shit. If that gets us, better healthcare for people who need it, or if that gets money in the pocket of people who don't have money, or a job to somebody who needs a job, fine.
Yeah. Some questions coming in the live chat.
Good.
So the first one is from Der Alta Trekkie, who asks, this is a nice, easy one. Why are people still voting for the right-wing party? Well, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a nice, easy answer to that?
There is.
Well, racism.
Yeah, racism. Well,
fear, ignorance, fear.
Yeah, it's actually a very easy question. Well, the thing too is, part of the problem is that right-wing rhetoric and really right-wing thinking is very simplistic, and as a result, it's easy to understand and it's intuitive even when it's wrong.
Right.
I mean, the whole idea, you think about supply side, the whole idea that, hey, if the people who hire everybody have more money to hire people, they'll hire more people. It sounds intuitive, right?
Right.
It's false. It doesn't actually work. And I can tell you as an employer, I don't hire, like, if they cut my taxes in half, I'm not going to hire somebody for that reason. I hire somebody because there's people calling who want my services and I don't have enough people to get the job done. that's demand is the only thing ever hired. I would say maybe at the margin, like if you're on the fence and okay, you got a little bit of extra cash, okay, maybe I can afford that extra person, but it's marginal.
Right.
It's gonna you're much more effective on this on the demand side, and that would produce a lot more economic benefit than giving money to people who already have more than everybody else.
Yeah.
But because those things are intuitive, well, again, even like the idea, like what you think about drug testing, the right wing loves to do drug testing of people getting assistance. And again, on its face, sure, none of us want to be financing somebody's drug habit. Of course not. But the thing is because everything they do is punitive, their thing is, well, I don't want to pay for somebody who's just going to use the money and stuff it up their nose. So I got to test everybody and make sure that they're not doing that. Well, the reality is when we do test, we see there's actually fewer people in the population of people who get assistance who do that than in the general population, because they most of them really desperately need the money. And then on top of it, the better way, if you look at a country like Portugal, would be to say, okay, well, this person obviously has a problem. They can't control their substance abuse, probably because their life is really shitty. And so let's try to find a way to help them get away from the drugs and make their life better, rather than hitting them over the stick and sending them out to starve to death.
Right. Exactly. Question from Radical Bacon. Their question is, what do you think about making it easier to found democratically owned and operated businesses?
Well, hey, I mean, sure, I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm not sure how in practice, how practical that is all the time. But if people want to do that, I'm for it. I mean, because I think people, have the right to personal sovereignty. And if a bunch of people want to get together and say, we're going to be, we're going to have this flat hierarchy, instead of a hierarchy, we're going to have this flat model. And we found a way to make it work where it's effective and we're all willing we want to make sure that everybody takes in both the risks and the rewards and the benefits and the deficits. And they're willing to do that. And it's equitable in a way that they all agree. I think we should facilitate that. Because that's one thing I've told people who are further to the left, people that, self-identified socialists and even neo-communists, that there's, generally speaking, there's nothing from stopping people from doing that now. Maybe we might need to alter the laws in some states to make it easier, and I'm all for that. But if you want to set up a worker-owned thing, I mean, they do exist. And so, so that's why sometimes I challenge people and they attack me because they're like, oh, well, you're the big evil, but regardless, not knowing anything about my policies or anything like that, or what I do with my employees who don't, I'm inherently an evil guy because I'm a capitalist, because I own a company. Ooh, come take my responsibility someday and we'll talk. But I challenge them. Well, have you tried to start a worker commune or a worker collective or syndicate or something like that? If you haven't, why? Well, why not? Now I think there may sometimes be difficulties with the banking side of it.
Yeah.
But these are things that, again, I'm happy that I agree that if those barriers are there, we should address them and to make it easier, because if that's what people want to do. And here's the thing, right wingers should be for that, because again, that anything that's removing burden toward business, they should be for.
Yeah, you would think, right? Freedom.
Yeah.
Freedom, buddy. If a bunch of workers want to start a worker-owned company, yeah, exactly. Republicans should be all for that.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Dana, who wants to know, what is your favorite RPG system, and also why is it 7th Sea?
Well, I'm not familiar with 7th Sea, so unfortunately it can't be my favorite if I've never encountered it. No pun intended. But my favorite, I'm not saying it's the best system, but it's my favorite system, is Hackmaster. Hackmaster is an RPG system, Hackmaster version 4, which is the first version, by the way. It's a whole big story I won't get into, but Hackmaster 4, it's based on 1st and 2nd edition D&D with a bunch of extra stuff added. It's got old school feel with but some gaps plugged and some new depth added to it. I like it because it's familiar, it plays easily, and it's very potentially deadly. So you get some interesting results. And but yeah, but I've played tons. I mean, I would say probably a Roll Master is probably a better system, but certainly more realistic, but there's lots of charts. So, you don't want to be pulling through a billion tables in chart. Some people have called it Chart Master. So,
and also on a related note, this is another question from Radical Bacon directed specifically to me. What can I do to get you to play D&D? You know the scene in Roadhouse when Brad Wesley is trying to get Dalton to come and work for him, and Dalton just says, "There's no amount of money. I'm afraid there's nothing you can do. I'm just not. I don't think I'm never going to be interested in playing D&D. All due respect to Joe and to all my, I have so many friends who are huge gamers and role-playing gamers and love it. And I think that's awesome. And, if you find something that you love, God, don't let me make you feel bad for doing it, but it's just not my thing. And I'm just, and so sorry, Radical Bacon, there's nothing.
Well, the thing that's always funny to me about that, Steve, is that you're an actor, and what is role playing but acting?
Well, right? But see, I come at that. See, that's my reason for not liking it, though, because that's what I always say. I always say, like, what if the role playing part of it is the enjoyable part? If you like creating characters, and telling stories, just do that. Like, why do you need a game? Why do you need rules? Why do you need to be rolling dice? Just do a scene, start an improv group.
Well, but that adds the element of the unknown. So now it's everything. You have to wait. You got a result you didn't expect, and now and obviously I know, because I know you're not a Lord of the Rings fans either. Right. So I can understand why if you don't like the Lord of the Rings, why D&D, something like D&D would not appeal to you.
Yeah.
But I always wondered sometimes if like a space RPG, like a Star Trek or Star Wars or one of those would be more appealing or less unappealing to you anyway.
I mean, maybe, less unappealing is probably a better way to put it. Because I'm still nobody hold your breath that I'm ever going to want to play one of those. But I mean, you're right. Like, I see the title Dungeons and Dragons and I'm immediately like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's just not my thing. But here's another question from Lisa Garrison, who says, what do we think about atheist YouTubers that we came up with who got sucked up into the Q conspiracy theories? And I mean, I've paid very little attention to the atheist YouTube scene for a while. So I don't know which of our former peers may have become QAnon conspiracy theorists. So if you have more knowledge than I do, please feel free to comment. But I don't have a lot of respect for anybody who is a Q conspiracy theorist. Yeah, whatever their belief may be.
Well, I know of two. They're not the only two, but they're two that I know because I knew them personally.
Okay.
Eagle Eye 1975 and Robert Wallace.
Okay. I know of both of those. I remember both of those. Yeah.
Now and one thing I'm going to say, and I've got documentation to back this up, so no one can accuse me of making spurious claims. But Eagle Eye is now in jail. Ironically, because the big thing about Q, right, is that there's this cabal of pedophilic lefties that are doing horrible things to children. He's in jail for pederasty.
Oh man!
In fact, he's probably never getting out. He's got like 100 and some odd year sentence. He's never getting out because of pederasty.
Jesus.
So, and he's the one that convinced Bob Wallace.
Yeah.
Of Q. So a pederast convinced another person that the Democrats were the pederasts, and that we had to stop the pederast Democrats. And now that pederast is in jail. Joseph Jared Mark.
Oh God. I mean,
it's insane.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And here's the sick part is that even after that reveal, you would think Bob might take a step back and go, "Oh, wait a minute. Okay, this is no, he's out in space somewhere." It's a shame because Bob used to be a good guy, but he started attacking Paul on Twitter, and that was like, "Yeah, no, you're done, dude."
That's it. Yeah. God, I mean, who goes after Paul?
He is
like the nicest guy.
He's one of the nicest people I've ever known.
Yeah.
He's one of my just like you. He's one of my favorite people in the world, And yeah, he gives everyone the benefit of the doubt
Yeah.
far beyond where he should.
I feel that's how I feel about him too. It's like he's too reasonable. He's too gentle. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like he's such a great guy.
right. And because of that, that's why when someone hurts him, it bothers me more. Okay, I can be a dick. So if someone gets at me, all right, fine. I might have even deserved it. But Paul, but Paul is so gentle and nice to everybody. He gives so many people so many benefits of so many doubts. And so if someone's going to be mean to him, the protector side of me wants to stand up and, and protect him.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a question from ER Mixon's Craziest Theories, one of my favorite usernames among my audience. Says, do you think we would be better off if we could remove the human element from politics? Is an objective supercomputer the better path?
Depends on how one defines better. It really does.
Yeah.
Would we get probably a better, more just world? Probably. Would people be happier? I'm not sure.
Yeah. The question makes me think of, because Dana and I are doing a read along series every other Friday where we're reading The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin, and really, really, really good book so far. But one of the reasons that a lot of people like it is because it sort of it argues in a very sort of measured way for a form of anarchism. I think anarchism is a nice idea that would never actually work in real life. But it does it in a way that it doesn't come across as like didactic or, polemical. Like it's a really, really good book. But one of the things that the anarchist society in The Dispossessed has is a computer that basically makes all the decisions that would otherwise maybe have to be made by some kind of hierarchical government.
Mm.
The computer decides decides where you're going to go to work, and even decides like what people's names are going to be, like all of the sort of decisions that might be that could be either made by a government or could cause like tension between people, or cause people to feel as though they were raised above someone else and create like different levels in society. Like it's all done by computer.
Mm.
And it's all voluntary. Like nobody has to do what the computer says, but that's kind of
Right.
just the way it works, and everybody mostly goes along with it. And so the question makes me think of that a little bit, and also of how that's still a hierarchy, even if you don't call it that.
Right.
If the computer is up here and you're down here, then that's still a hierarchy, even if you're pretending that it's not because you're an anarchist and you don't like hierarchy. Like that's
Right.
still what it is. But yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean, I view both. Well, okay, I've said this before. You've heard me say this before, but I look at like there's right wing anarchism, there's left wing anarchism.
Oh, for sure.
A bunch of stuff in between. So right wing is ANCAPism, it's like anarcho, so hey, if everything's a corporation, everything's in terms of money, and you're free to do what you want with your business kind of thing, and it's all about material wealth. And then on the leftist side, it tends toward like anarcho-communism. And again, neither in my view, neither of those really work, because in the right wing version is extremely selfish, because then people so if I want to just put poison on the ground and pretend that it's my ground, but of course the poison doesn't sit on my ground, and it travels to everybody near me and it poisons them too. So obviously that's no good. And the problem I find for ANCOMs is that, like, state communism, even though I don't want it, it makes more sense. But the problem I see with ANCOM is, like, just say the whole idea of having a bunch of syndicates, that's workable to a degree. But the problem is that resources are not evenly divided in the ground. I'm not talking about, so you got certain materials are rare. Some are, and then certain materials are abundant in some places and scarce in others. And the problem is that in the areas that are the most resource poor, how do they without some sort of centralized clearinghouse to make sure that the resources are being distributed in an equitable fashion.
Right.
How do you ensure that syndicates don't just end up like this? Here's a syndicate here, and maybe within the syndicate it's nice and all communist and all that, but they're wealthy because they got access to all the good stuff, and they have now power over the other syndicates in ways that aren't really any better, or then become maybe feudalism at that point, or maybe not feudalism, but you know what I mean? It still ends up being hierarchical because there's nothing to ensure that the resources are equitably distributed. And I've tried talking with people about it, and they're like, oh, well, if we didn't have mercantilism, if we didn't have consumerism, there would be less waste. I'm like, I agree. There would be way less waste if we didn't have consumerism, because you wouldn't stock the stores knowing that you've got at least 20% waste because you're just trying to make it look like there's more shit than there really needs to be. But on the flip side, and there's also bad versions of stuff because some people are poor and can't afford the good version. So we make a cheap one that in the life of the person, they're going to spend actually more money than if they could afford the good one in the first place.
Yeah.
But I just don't see how, that still doesn't answer the question. Like, we're looking at solar panels. What's the issue right now? China has most of the rare earths that we need to make the solar panel. So until we come up with a solar panel that doesn't require those particular materials, the syndicates in China would have a leg up over everybody else, at least in that market. And so how do you whether you have currency or not, you still end up having a wealth disparity somehow.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. In unevenly distributed resources. A follow-up question from Dana about gaming. Have you ever played Sentinels of the Multiverse? And she adds, if not, all caps, please check it out.
Okay. Sentinels of the Multiverse.
Sentinels of the Multiverse.
I will take a look and see. It sounds like it could be a lot of things, really. But I will check it out. I have played, if anyone in the audience is familiar with Shadowrun, I did like that. Shadowrun is kind of a cyberpunk-y kind of game. But it's like cyberpunk meets fantasy. So it's a world where elves and orcs and all that are real. And there's magic, but there's also high technology. So that's kind of interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One last question from Douglas Sharon, directed at me, but you'll probably have an opinion on this too. Says, two questions. Do you think the coronavirus is fake? And also, what do you think of the Capitol riots? Well, no.
I need questions.
I don't think the coronavirus is fake. I don't think like 500,000 people in this country alone have died of nothing. And I was not a fan of the Capitol riots. So I don't know.
As you surmise, Steve, I do have opinions on both those questions. I'll give you two answers to the first question. My knee-jerk answer is, what are you, a fucking idiot?
Yes.
My more measured answer is, my mother was infected with COVID and was sick for 3 months.
Yeah.
So I know it's real because she was ill with it, and I also know of actually a friend of mine from high school recently who died from it, and I know lots of friends who died from it. So like you said, they're dying from something. So if it's not COVID, then what? I mean, maybe we're all wrong. It's kind of like the people the AIDS denialists that like, well, yes, something's killing them, but it's not this particular virus. It's something that I can't prove, but it's not HIV. Like, really? And as far as the Capitol riots, politically, it's the single worst thing that's happened since we've been a republic.
Mm-hmm. Because
now the glass is broken on open rebellion. I mean, basically, the next worst. I guess. Maybe a civil war. Because that was where we actually did break away. Yeah. So that's two. So it's number two. It's the second worst political thing that's ever happened in this country. And of course it's by the same fucking people. Same fucking people.
Weird how they keep causing all the trouble.
So
Yeah.
I hope I'm just laughing at all the ones that thought that Trump was going to bail them out.
Oh,
So I hope they enjoy their long jail stays. I hope they get the maximum. I have no compassion for any of them.
yeah.
Um, there's people on now. They're oh, we didn't know. These are the same people who sneered at the BLM people,
Exactly.
protesters, and every time a black person gets slaughtered by agents of the state, who you think they would be, they'd have some compassion because that's their big thing, anti-government, right? But their question is, well, what were they doing, kind of thing. They always assume that it was justified. So yeah, I've got zero compassion for them. I hope they rot. I just hope we get all of them.
Yeah.
So to reduce I still think there's going to be shit happening, but maybe that'll reduce the odds or minimize it to whatever degree we can minimize it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way. I have no pity in my heart for them whatsoever. I hope I hope they all get caught. I hope they all get prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And that they have a nice long prison sentence to sit around and think about the fact that they're in there because of Donald Trump. like I don't know if you've ever seen, there was I think Bo Burnham did one of those talks at the 92nd Street Y in New York, and they streamed it on, and it was a couple years ago, and he I don't know, I think the moderator might have asked him a question about it, like, and he said, the thing that I just still cannot get over is that these people are doing this for Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump. Like, it's Donald Trump, right? Like, we know this guy. He's been and he just sort of kept repeating that for like 2 or 3 minutes, like just in utter disbelief. Like, it's Donald Trump, the guy from The Apprentice.
Yeah.
This is the guy that you picked as your guy. What? Like, something does not work here.
Well, especially living here in New Jersey, as I have the bulk of my life.
Yeah.
And knowing, so I knew who he was in the '80s, what kind of guy he was. A friend of mine's father was one of the contractors that got stiffed. He got stiffed for like $29,000 worth of work. Trump didn't pay a cent. So it's like he was always a grifter. Like, so when someone said, "Oh, you just don't like him," I'm like, "Yeah, because I know who he is already." He was saying, "Oh, you're just going by the media." No, I'm going by him because I've watched this guy for 40 fucking years, and I knew exactly what kind of evil, bastard that he is.
Yeah.
So it is so bizarre, particularly from the evangelicals, because for a fact, if any Democrat did anything remotely like this,
yeah,
they would have been, they would if they were Catholic, they'd be excommunicated. If they're, or whatever other church, they'd be being condemned constantly. But they don't care. They only care about power. So that's why I'm like, there actually are no right-wing ideals. They were always a sham. They were never true, and they've proven it now. And just to dovetail to what the last question and what you said about it, no unity without accountability.
Right. Exactly.
Because the reason why we're here today in this situation is because we didn't hold the South accountable after the Civil War.
I agree.
We tried to have unity, and we tried to look the other way, and we tried to say, make nice, and we basically sacrificed my ancestors and everyone in between them to me on that altar of unity. And that's why we're still, there's still people flying Confederate flags, 160 years later.
Yeah, exactly. Because the Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln after he was assassinated, well, he started dismantling Reconstruction almost immediately.
Right.
I mean, Reconstruction did last for some years. It wasn't like it went away immediately, but it was, it was not nearly what it was intended to be or what it should have been. And I mean, and that's not, I mean, and sometimes I've said before, half jokingly, but also half not jokingly, whenever, like, especially like, when anytime anybody, like anytime like Marjorie Taylor Greene says something absolutely outrageous, I'll
which is
sort of,
always.
which is always every time she says anything, I'll say like, Sherman should have burned it all down, and I'm half joking, but I'm also kind of serious.
Yeah,
Like, there should not, maybe not literally, maybe not, the army should not have gone through, all of the Confederacy and burned down everybody's house, but there should have been more accountability for the people who were in charge, for the people who helped to make it happen, for legislators who voted for secession, for military leaders, for, I
yeah,
mean, for plantation owners who abused slaves for generations. There should have been some accountability, and some transfer of resources and wealth to freed slaves when there really wasn't. I mean, and it just, yeah, I agree
I,
with you completely.
well,
Yeah.
well, that's the thing. I mean, because if you look at, like, okay, my father came from Alabama. No banjo on his knee.
Mm.
Because he couldn't afford a banjo, right?
He couldn't
But
afford a banjo.
but you know, at the end of the Civil War, the black population was like 60%.
Hmm.
So if people had actually had real power, real political power because of their numbers, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today. And so I mean, I've been doing genealogy for quite a
Yeah.
while, and I found, so one of my great great grandfathers, his name was George Grimsley. I found his voting registration in 1867, first in freed slave of my family that I know for, that was the earliest that I could find of anybody actually registering to vote.
Hmm.
So just imagine if the post Reconstruction reign of terror didn't happen, and we could have used our superior numbers to actually have a safe haven. The South could have become, at least parts of the South could have been a safe haven for black people.
Absolutely.
But basically, and so that's why when people today that don't understand, like, well, why didn't they just lift themselves up? It's like, well, it wasn't just that, like, well, we were freed and we just didn't figure out what to do. Like, there was actually 100+ years of a boot on our neck to make sure that we didn't.
Yeah.
And that's why when people who and, like, I get people make some logistical arguments against reparations, and I get that. I still disagree, but I get the point. That's at
Hmm.
least a rational point. But when they get into the, well, I didn't take anything, and my answer is like, you're all living on the profits of crime,
Yeah.
because you
Exactly. You're
had,
benefiting. We benefit from it.
that's right,
Yeah.
250 years of slavery, and then 100+ years of basically exploitation.
Yeah.
And that was so there's this huge transfer of wealth thing. That's funny. The right wing's against the transfer of wealth. Well, yeah, only if it's from them to somebody else. They don't care.
Exactly.
More than happy to take it the other way. And
Exactly.
so, and it has come for me, because I've done the genealogy and because I've actually learned their names. Because most of us, we know that we have slave ancestors. We don't, but it's kind of abstract.
Hmm.
I know
Yeah.
their names. I know a bunch of their names. And so it became a lot more personal, because these are real. I got some pictures of them.
Right.
And there are people in my family today who knew some of my enslaved ancestors. So that's the thing. That's how recently slavery is. Even though it was hundreds of years, there's people living today who knew people who had been slaves.
Hmm. Yeah. It's still in living memory,
Yeah,
which is astonishing when you think about it. But yeah, it was that recently.
right. So
Yeah.
when people say, well, when are we getting done paying for the crime? Like, the crime's still ongoing.
Yeah.
That's what BLM's all about.
Yeah.
We're still getting killed en masse in the streets without accountability.
Yeah. I did a video a couple weeks ago about voter suppression, and Lisa Garrison just posted something in the live chat, and I'll make this point and then we'll wrap up. Um, Lisa Garrison made the point in the live chat a minute ago. The first black member of Congress was elected uh, right after the Civil War, and to expand that a little bit further, like there were black candidates that were elected in state legislatures all across the former Confederacy, and then the white supremacist powers that be got scared and thought, oh shit, we gave them the right to vote and they're actually going to vote, and they immediately clamped down. And as Lisa says in her chat message, the first black member of Congress was elected in like 1866, and then after that there were no more for like a century.
Right.
And that's one of the starkest illustrations of the damage caused by the premature end of Reconstruction, and what could have been had that not happened.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's and I don't know how you can make a serious argument against that, you know, where there was this tiny window after the Civil War where real progress seemed possible, and then it was completely squashed by white people.
That's right.
You know,
and those times when we did actually start to come up and build ourselves up, you get Tulsa 1921.
Tulsa, yeah.
Hey, those black guys actually did, you know, pull themselves up and created a community and build wealth, and had banks and businesses and all this kind of stuff, and they were bombed out of existence, literally.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, it's it's the same thing. It's a much more violent, much more, you know, horrific version of the rhetoric that people threw at Kaepernick. You know, like, well, you don't protest like that. You know, I don't mind when people protest, just don't do it like that. And it turns out you're not allowed. They're basically saying just don't protest at all.
Right.
You know, and it's the same thing with like in Tulsa, like, hey, we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. We created our own economy. We created our own success. Oh, you can't do that either.
No,
you know, you're not allowed to do that either.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly. You know, and that's the thing with, you know, I unfriended somebody today who was basically trying to do they're trying to equate the BLM with the Capitol riot. I'm like, well, no one in BLM was trying to usurp the government and overthrow, and have, start basically a revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when we were peaceful, you still hated on us. You were one of the people who were against Kaepernick. Well, that was peaceful protest. So you can only do that to people for so long before they eventually say, well, we tried it your way.
Yeah.
That's what's next. And so actually I laugh when I hear people say, well, why do they destroy their own neighborhoods? I'm like, be glad, because they didn't come to your neighborhood. Right. That's next. That's next. You don't want that. I don't want that either. But
no, nobody wants it. I mean, black folks that are pissed off don't want that either.
Right.
Like, they want things to be better. They want things to change. Right. And it's like, if they keep being ignored, well, what the fuck do you think is going to happen?
When you make all peace, when all peaceful forms of expressing grievances are shunned and disallowed and generally made, delegitimized, then you're going to get illegitimate expression of those same grievances.
Yeah, it's inevitable. It's inevitable.
Either a bullet or the ballot, right?
Yeah, here you go. Well, on that note, but it's important. It's a good note. It's a good note to end on, because it's, that we need to keep that in mind, and those of us who are able to speak out about things, have, even if it's just a little audience, if you have any amount of influence or any kind of a voice that can be heard, like, I feel like it's responsible to, to try to nudge people in the right direction. And that's something that is really, really important.
Well, and that's why, Steve, I want to say I appreciate you giving me the platform and talk. Anytime you do, I mean, you've done it tons of times, and I always appreciate it. But because it is Black History Month, to me, it actually holds a little extra special meaning than normal.
Well, we'll give you the shortest month.
I did a video on that before. I know I don't want to spend this thing too much long, but I pointed out that when you look at the fact that Black History Month is the shortest month, and if you compare the percentage of days into that versus what we would get if since we are 13% of the population, that we get 3/5 of what February gives us 3/5 of what we should be getting.
Ooh, I like that. Well, you know what else too is, March, of course, is Women's History Month, because we felt if we made it January, February, we thought that'd be too obvious. So we made it February, March. So we still get it out of the way early in the year.
That's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
like,
We'll give 52% of the population, 1/12 of the time.
yeah, like it's too, we can't make Black History Month January. That's too obvious. Make it February. So it doesn't, and Women's History Month very next month. Yeah. Just get it out of the way. We don't, ah,
And if we just included those things as part of the regular curriculum, we wouldn't need
right.
Black or Women's History Month.
Yeah. Just teach it like with the rest of history. Like you should have been doing all along anyway.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyway, thank you so much for coming on with me, and I knew we would have no problem whatsoever filling. We've been going for an hour and a half, which is awesome. So your YouTube channel is linked in the description, my friend. You are one of my oldest and most treasured YouTube friends, and just a treasured friend just in general. And I really love getting to talk to you.
Same here, Steve. I love talking anytime.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for watching. Don't forget, if you are able to, throw some money at Oxfam and Kiva, and we really appreciate you doing that. And thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.